Well, hello. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to another Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So that's what I talk about. If you like true crime, and you also want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every Tuesday where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. Ugh, guys, my skin is so terrible. It's so hot. My skin does not do well in the heat. I think I also over-exfoliated because, my skin just feels so greasy in the heat. And man, it's going to be a tough one to get through today just because of how bloody hot it is. Not only do we have kind of a lot to go over, it is so bloody hot. And I can't have my AC or fan on, because of background noise. In fact, let's see how hot it actually is. Yeah, it's 103 degrees outside right now. Yeah. So, man, I might have to do this video in batches because it is so hot. And yeah, man, my skin is just, it hates it. How's it like where you're at right now? Are you also melting from excessive heat? Or I know there's certain parts of the US that are like really being flooded right now. How's the weather where you're at? Anyway, enough about the weather. Let's get on to today's case now. Oh, man, guys. I just realized, the last, 3 or 4 cases I've done, we've dealt with child victims, and unfortunately, today, it's another one of those cases. Today's case, man, the victim was a baby, alright? It was an infant. So, yeah, definitely disclaimer, be forewarned, alright? We are talking about the death of an infant, and it's a brutal death. And the infant was killed by her own mother, alright? Today's case, it's a rough one, alright? Today, we're talking about the case of Dena Schlosser. And yeah, man, it's just a sad one today. So yeah, disclaimer, like I said, we're talking about the death of an infant. We are also going to talk a lot about mental illness, alright? Dina was obviously very mentally ill, and we'll get into it. This is just a sad case all the way around. This case gets likened to Andrea Yates, and it will be no wonder as we get into this case. And yeah, I think there's just nothing else to say. Let's go ahead and talk about Dena Schlosser. So Dena Schlosser, she was actually born Dina Leitner. Now, an exact birth date is not really known. We know that she was born in 1969. I did read one source, and only one source, that claimed her birthday was August 1st, 1969. So not quite sure. We also do not know her exact hometown. We just know that she was born somewhere in upstate New York. Dina's mother's name was Connie McCauley, and Dina's birth father's name is actually unknown. Her mother and father actually divorced when Dina was 5. However, she did have a stepfather named Robert Nichols. It was Connie's second husband, and this was who Dina thought of as her father. He raised her since, she was about 5 or 6, and Dina always thought of him as her father. And even after he divorced Dina's mother, the two were said to, still be close. Dina still called him dad. It is said Dina was also very, very close to her mother, and she was described as never really seeking independence from her mother. Connie was described as a, quote, dynamic businesswoman who was fiercely protective over her daughter. Some say maybe a little too overprotective, maybe. It is said at the time of the events of today's case, Dina was phoning her mother upwards of a dozen times a day, which I'm not sure how she could because her mother was pretty sick when the events of today's case take place, which, we'll get into later. But yeah, that's just what several articles said. Now, at some point, Connie remarried a 3rd time, this time to a psychologist named Mick McCauley. It is said the couple had a son, Dina's half-brother, who they named Brock. Now, I read a couple sources that said that this was not their son, that Brock was Dina's stepbrother, and that he was a child of Mick's previous relationship. So, not quite sure, but, Dina does now have a brother named Brock. Now, there's not a lot known about Dina's life, guys, and her childhood and upbringing. We didn't even have, an exact birthday or birthplace for her, you know what I mean? But we do know that when she was very, very young, we're talking 7, 8 years old, guys, she suffered a profound medical trauma. So when Dina was about 7 years old, she started suffering from really weird symptoms, like pain in her eyes, and experiencing debilitating headaches, like migraines. And it was after her parents took her to the doctor that Dina was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, otherwise known as water on the brain. And this is a condition in which fluid like collects in your brain, and it has like a myriad of symptoms and there are side effects, and they're not good. Enlargement of the head, headaches, vision impairment, incontinence, loss of coordination. It is said that it is most commonly found in young children and like older elderly adults. Now, if left untreated, it can cause some pretty serious issues, including brain damage, issues with the brain functioning, and it can lead to death. Though it's a rare condition, it's pretty serious if left untreated. Now, hydrocephalus, it is caused by an imbalance between how much cerebrospinal fluid is produced versus how much is getting absorbed into the bloodstream. And that's what this buildup of fluid is, all right? Yeah, so it's pretty serious. So Dina was diagnosed in Chicago, where the family was living, I'm assuming, and she had about 3 or 4 surgeries before the family relocated to Houston, Texas for her stepfather's work. Here, while she's attending junior high, Dina had an additional 4 surgeries to correct the amount of fluid in her brain. And man, guys, like what she went through was very traumatic. It wasn't like some quick and simple one-time operation. Between the ages of 8 and 13, Dina had a total of 8 surgery, guys. 8 surgeries to correct this. Between 8 and 13 years old, serious surgeries. Can you imagine? She had shunts implanted into her heart, brain, and abdomen during these surgeries. Robert said 2 of the surgeries were to implant the shunts into Dina's brain, and that was so they could drain the excess fluid buildup in her brain. Now, though Dina did manage to get through these surgeries without any like major complications or anything like that, like I guess it went as well as it could. Remember, this is like head surgery. A lot of these surgeries were for her head, and so she had to have her head shaved. Good Lord, can't talk. She had to have her head shaved, and so this caused a lot of bullying from fellow kids because kids are dicks. Like, can you imagine making fun of someone because, not just because, like, they have a shaved head, but, like, because it was, like, a medically necessary procedure, you know? Like, I don't understand. Too bad she wasn't a kid today with that, because I feel like that's sort of, like, an in look right now, right? Especially because of, like, like, stuff like Stranger Things and stuff. But yeah, poor Dina, on top of having these traumatic surgeries, was then subjected to bullying. And she was subjected to so much bullying that like this just sort of caused her to sort of like withdraw a little bit and become even closer to her mother. So yeah, she was kind of sheltered. Now, this is about all that's known about Dina's childhood, all right? The next thing that is known is that Dina went ahead and attended Marist College, and this was located in Poughkeepsie, New York. Now, it is said here at college, like Dina sort of had like the quintessential college experience where, kind of like awkward and not a lot of friends in like elementary and junior and high school, but like in college, you sort of like blossom. Yeah, for the first time in her life, she actually had a pack of friends. She just kind of, like really leaned into herself. And these friends that, she associated with were much like her, they labeled themselves, quote, misfits, And it was the first time that, Dina had like a pack of friends. She earned herself a bachelor's degree in psychology in 1991. And it is while she is attending Marist College that Dina met her future husband, Dena Schlosser. It is said he was studying software engineering. Other articles just said he was studying computer science. John was described as being socially awkward and just being like extremely private. I read one source that said Dina and John had been introduced by mutual friends. And I read another source that said that John was actually part of like her friend group and that's how they had met. I really can't stand when eyeshadow just like gets everywhere and is just like powdery and a mess. So annoying. Now, John never graduated with his college degree. I read several sources that said like Dina's parents actually like helped pay for part of his schooling. And when he told them like that he had a graduation day, his own parents even flew out. But yeah, it turns out it was all a farce. John was not graduating. In fact, he'd been kicked out. And this was for academic reasons and just failing to show up for class. Dina's stepfather and her mother's husband, Mick, he said that when it comes to Dena Schlosser, quote, appearances are more important than substance. John and Dina eventually got married, and they actually got married before Dina graduated in a small, quiet ceremony in 1990. And there's actually not a lot known about it, just that they got married. The couple ended up moving to Fort Worth, Texas, and they would end up having 3 children, all daughters. The oldest was Brianna, and she was 9 years old at the time of the events of today's case. The middle child was Kelsey, and she was 6, and the youngest was Margaret Elizabeth Schlosser, and she was about 10 to 11 months old. Margaret had been born on January 9th, 2004. Now, it has been reported that Dina actually suffered 3 miscarriages prior to giving birth to her 2 oldest daughters. And it is said that each time Dina was pregnant, she struggled really hard with depression, which will be a very, very important note. Now, for several years, way before baby Margaret was born, the Schlossers lived in Fort Worth, Texas, like I said. They had their 2 daughters, and they lived in a nice upper middle class neighborhood. I read that they moved there in 2000 and had actually moved there from Illinois. Like I said, not a lot is known about Dina's life, but I mean, she had been diagnosed in Chicago, so maybe she did have some Illinois ties. But either way, we know the family's in Texas now. And while they are here in Fort Worth, it is said that Dina was just like that all-American roundabout mom, just very sociable. She organized neighborhood events, was very involved in her daughter's lives, like handmade Halloween costumes for them and stuff like that. Some neighbors who knew the Schlossers and lived near them, Lorenzo and Angela Parrish, they said like how one time, right, they went over to the Schlossers and they were visiting, and there was like some passing comment about how much they like loved chocolate chip cookies or something like that, and like without hesitation and without like anyone saying anything, Dina like got up and just started like whipping up a batch of cookies. They were saying like those were just the kind of people the Schlossers were. Those were the kind of neighbors they were. In fact, Dina was described as just being like the perfect neighbor, you know, like this is the woman that you wanted to live next door to you. She just seemed to be just so sweet and generous and active and sociable. Now, while they were living here, John had some sort of like very lucrative, high-paying job working with computers. I couldn't get like an exact description of what the heck he did, just that it was, quote, something to do with computers. He was described as being a, quote, cool guy, easygoing and nice to talk to. That's what Lorenzo Parrish said about him. Neighbors described John being just as equally devoted to his family. Both him and Dina were active members of the PTA, and their marriage seemed affectionate enough too. However, there are those that say that Dina had transferred her dependency that had been attached to her mother all these years and had just sort of transferred that onto John, her new husband. It is said that though Dina was a very loving, caring, devoted mother, she did kind of struggle in the discipline department, and she kind of just seemed unable to make any kind of decision without consulting John first. You know what I mean? She wasn't the most independent person, but around 2001, 2002, with like the dot-com bubble burst, the Schlossers' financial situation changed drastically. So John lost his high-paying, lucrative job, which, yeah, again, I could only find described as a, quote, computer specialist, whatever that means. Although it was kind of weird. So there were other sources, right? There were quite a few articles that said 3 months after moving to Fort Worth, John had found like another position than the one he originally took, like why they moved there. He had found another position and it paid $130,000 a year. Or at least this is what he told neighbors. And considering that, you know, they lived in a nice neighborhood and had nice things, I'm going to assume he was telling the truth. But I guess for whatever reason, this job only lasted for 90 days. I don't know if it was a temp job. I don't know if he quit, got fired, not sure. There are like conflicting reports about that. Again, I think because, you know, I said this earlier, I think because John is just a private guy, there's just, yeah, some things that we just don't know. But yeah, we do know around this time, yeah, they are beset by financial woes. John loses his job, whatever that is. And it is said in the meantime, as he tried to find more work, he tried to support the family, and he tried doing like a side job, some sort of like computer consulting side job that he tried to run out of his house. But I don't think that was like, yeah, nearly as like lucrative or anything. So yeah, they were struggling on top of that, because, you know, bad news just loves to happen like that, right? So they're already struggling financially when at this time, like right after John lost his job, they find out Connie, you know, Dina's mother, she has has Parkinson's. And this, just devastated Dina. She's very close to her mother. Now, neighbors said that it is around this time when all this bad stuff is happening, right, that the Schlossers, they changed a little bit, right? They became more spiritual, especially Dina. And this was because the Schlossers had ended up finding a small little church that they started attending. This church was located in Plano, Texas. Yes, I remembered how to pronounce it. I read those corrections under the candy one. I know. So yeah, this church that the Schlossers found, it was in Plano, Texas, and it was called the Water of Life Church. And the Schlossers ended up attending about 4 to 6 times a week. And this is despite, all right, they're in Fort Worth, all right, this church is in Plano. That's like about 60 miles. So yeah, despite the distance, it is said that the Schlossers are attending quite regularly. There are some articles that said that they started attending, very sporadically and kind of, at first around 2001 or so. And yeah, they just, devoted more and more time to it. Angela Parrish described Dina around this time, saying that Dina seemed to be, quote, seeking. She didn't preach. She didn't witness. She only said she was very content with whatever God gave her. So it was Dina was searching very inwardly, and focusing inward on her own spirituality around this time. Friends said that around this time too, as she delved more into her spirituality and into the Water of Life Church, that Dina almost seemed to be searching and seeking an answer as to why these bad things were happening to her, why John lost his good paying job, why her mother was suffering, and she seemed to be trying to seek answers why was this stuff happening. Now, not only did friends and neighbors notice that Dina got way more spiritual, they noticed slowly that her personality was changing. She was becoming more insular, wasn't nearly as outgoing or sociable as before. Now, unfortunately, John was unable to find work, and in the fall of 2002, the Schlossers lost their pretty home in Fort Worth to foreclosure. They ended up moving to an apartment in Plano, Texas, and John started collecting unemployment. And of course, now that they were in Plano, they could, dedicate even more time to the church. Now, what is this church that the Schlossers are attending, the Water of Life Church? Well, I am going to do a little side story about this church a little bit, because as we'll see, it's pretty important in the events of today's case. It's very important to Dina and how she thinks. And yeah, you will see as we get into it, it's actually pretty important. So let's briefly get into this church. What is this church? So the Water of Life Church was founded on November 24th, 1980 in Plano. And it was founded by a veterinarian turned minister. And his name was Doyle Davidson. Now, he said that God had talked to him, all right? And God had told him to come to Plano to speak to the people there. And why? Why did the people of Plano need Doyle to go there? Well, he said, according to God, there was a Jezebel spirit that ruled over Plano, and Doyle had to go there as an apostle to preach the word of God there and drive out the spirit. This is what Doyle says encouraged him to abandon his career as a veterinarian and set up this church and be a minister. Doyle preached that behind any bad thing, tragedy, or trauma in one's life, whether it be something as benign as bad weather or something as serious as a traumatic event happening, these were all the result of demons, right? It was demons that were behind all these. Sounds like the job for the Winchesters to me, but I don't mean to be disrespectful, but as we'll get into it, just let me tell you more about Doyle here. All right. So yeah, Doyle is saying that every bad thing that happens in your life, it's the result of demons, all right? The most evil of all these demons, it was the spirit of Jezebel. And this Jezebel spirit was named after the wife of King Ahab of the Old Testament. Now, the spirit of Jezebel, described as a wicked, seductive, and supremely manipulative demon, all right? She's a particularly nasty one. Or I guess I guess demons don't really have genders in that sense of the word. Anyway, the Jezebel spirit manifested itself in wives who weren't subservient to their husbands and lodged in women's reproductive organs. And this, of course, caused problems with child rearing and other health ailments, all right? That's this Jezebel spirit. Now, part of Doyle's religion and his church, it seeks to, quote, exorcise women of the wicked Jezebel spirit. And remember, the Jezebel spirit is in any wife that refuses to submit. Now, Doyle's doctrine, it also preached that mental illness was also caused by demons. Medicine was forbidden in his doctrine because enough prayer and faith could heal any ailment. Like, his whole doctrine was pretty much like, if anything bad happens to you, it's because you just didn't have enough faith, all right? It's kind of your own fault. Like, that was sort of the basis of his whole doctrine and what he preached. And he said if you didn't have enough faith, yeah, you were beset by demons, and they made all this bad stuff happen to you. And of course, because, you know, why not? Doyle also had a cable TV program, and he's had it since 1984. Little unclear if it's still airing, but it was broadcast in 5 stations. One in Dallas, Texas, one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, one in South Bend, Indiana, one in Joplin, Missouri, and another in Springfield, Missouri. Although, I guess in 1999, Doyle lost like a couple of these markets because he said some pretty outrageous things about the Columbine shooting. He said 2 of the girls that were killed in Columbine, Casey Bernal, I actually read her mom's book way back in the day, and Rachel Scott, they were 2 of the girls that were like gunned down for their faith or whatever. I know with Cassie, I know one of them asked her, like, oh, do you believe in God? And she said yes before, you know, he shot her. So yeah, Doyle was saying that these 2 girls, they were shot and they were killed because they didn't have enough faith. If they had had enough faith, that bullet wouldn't have killed them. Yeah. So, yeah, he lost a couple of the markets for those comments. I mean, come on, dude. Like, obviously, let's not beat around the bush anymore. Like, Doyle is misogynist. And he has even openly called female parishioners of his, quote, stupid, quote, bitch, and, quote, non-believers. Yeah, this guy has serious issues with women. He has said that medicine is, quote, witchcraft. At one of his sermons, I guess, one of the female parishioners had her baby, and he was crying because, you know, it's a baby. And he shouted, quote, shut that brat up, as he was talking, like he was preaching. And yeah, the baby had some nerve to sit there and cry while he was preaching. Yeah, Doyle is very, I mean, come on, dude, like, do I gotta spell it out for you? I mean, I will, but it's like, come on, you know, right? He's a misogynist, he's a moron, he's an egomaniacal jackass. Not to mention a huge, I mean, I already just said this, egomaniacal, he's a huge child, so of course that plays into that. One time during one of his sermons, he felt like his audience wasn't giving him the attention he wanted, like he was not getting enough attention. And he said, quote, I guess if I took my gun and shot every 3rd person in the front row, bet I'd get your attention. Who does that remind you of? Now, there are many who accuse Water of Life of, like, not being a church at all. It is not a church. It is, in fact, a cult. Yeah, I mean, come on, dude. Like, everything I've described to you about, like, who Doyle is, what he practices, come on, dude. Like, are you really shocked? Of course, dude. Like, when I was reading about this guy, because I went down a little separate rabbit hole and really found out who this guy was, like, oh my god. And again, you're probably asking, like, I don't understand how this relates to Dina. We will get to there, I promise. This is very relevant. There, have been some ex-members and ex-followers of Doyle, and like I said, they have labeled Water of Life Church, not a church, but a cult, who brainwashes their followers. All of these ex-members have painted Doyle as egotistical, yeah, womanizing, a maniacal person who actually believes that his word is that, like, of God's. All right, when he speaks, God is speaking. He even said once that, like, he actually had no sins. Yeah, he told his congregants once that he had no sins and he would, in fact, never die. Even Doyle's own family, guys, his own parents, before they died, refused to talk to him. His own siblings, his own family refused to talk to him because they all thought he was nuts. They did not believe he was led by God or anyone else. He was led by his own ego. And yeah, his own family didn't want anything to do with him. His in-laws, because of course he did have a wife, his in-laws accuse him of, what do you think, of isolating their daughter, brainwashing her, influencing her, making her feel small. But these ex-members, you know, they say Doyle, like with a lot of cult leaders, like, because you're probably thinking, like, dude, who the hell would follow this guy? Well, like a lot of cult leaders, Doyle just has, like, a charm and charisma about him that draws certain people in. Look, man, I don't get it either. Like, look at him. Like, I don't get it either. I do not get it either. But that's what they say, man, is that's how he was able to attract some people. It is said that, like, when he preached, he was very entertaining when he preached. Despite, like, his gravelly, unappealing voice, his, like, ugly face, apparently, like, when he preached, he was entertaining in the way he was doing it. And frankly, like, I wonder if some of the appeal for some people, like, honestly, wasn't, like, the things he said. Because, like, honestly, if I'm being, like, honest, when I was reading about him and the things that he said and the things that he did that we will get into, I don't know, he kind kind of reminded me of like an evangelical edgelord or something that was just like trying so hard to say like the most controversial, outrageous things to like get attention. You know what I mean? I don't get it, but yeah, he appealed enough that he had like a couple hundred followers. Now, let's get into some more outrageous stuff about Doyle. So in the fall of 2004, Doyle claimed that God had given him a, quote, new wife. Yeah. So this woman's name was Lisa Staton. And it was reported that she was, a parishioner, and she was actually Doyle's secretary. Now, one of the many problems with Doyle's proclamation here is that Lisa was very happily married. Well, she was married. Her husband, Harold Jr., was also a parishioner of the church, and yeah, Harold and Lisa had been married for quite some time. Also, not only was Lisa married, but remember I said Doyle was married. He had a wife, and this was a woman named Patty, and they had gotten married in 1952. They also had a daughter named Kathy. But, so get this, in 1984, Doyle said that the Jezebel spirit had gotten into Patty. In fact, it infected his wife and every woman at his congregation. Apparently, during one of their like prayer sessions or something, I don't know. But Patty had put her hands on a woman to pray over her, and the Jezebel spirit infected her, guys. Jezebel got her. It infected Patty. Not only did it turn around and infect Patty, it infected every woman that was at that prayer session, guys. Jezebel, she's a little stinker. From that point onward, Doyle said that he did not consider Patty his wife any longer, that God had divided them. But he would continue to stay with her and support her, just not divorce her. Okay, the mental gymnastics, man. Patty would end up dying in 2003, which, of course, Doyle said was caused by the Jezebel spirit. Well, Jezebel certainly took her time if she infected Patty in 84 and she didn't pass away till 03. And it was when Patty died that Doyle knew that God had given him a new wife. And that was in the form of Lisa. So according to Doyle, all right, according to him, he knew Lisa was his wife going way back when. Way back when. In fact, he remembers the exact date that he knew Lisa was supposed to be his new wife. It was August 27th, 1987. He claims Lisa, who by the way is over 20 years younger than him, shocker, approached him in the church hall and told him that she had never made love to anyone but her husband, but that she could see making love to him, Doyle. Yeah, Doyle said that this is what Lisa came up to him on this date and said. She said that she didn't know if this was God talking to her or her, quote, wicked heart. Doyle said he prayed on this. All right, so guys, he literally said this stuff. You can look it up. So he said he went home to contemplate on this, and he prayed to God. And the next day, God spoke to him and said, you know what? Lisa's your new wife. You go for it. Doyle said from that moment onward, Lisa's marriage to Harold was no longer valid. And it didn't matter because this was God's will now. All right? And that's above everything else. Yeah, what? What? This is real. This is real, guys. This is real. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be inappropriate, but it's just oh my God. Can you imagine? I don't get it. I don't get it. So from this point onward, guys, all right, it is said Lisa and Doyle engaged in an affair. But remember, it's not really an affair because it's, quote, God's will, right? So yeah, I guess, I don't know if Lisa really came up to him in the church hall. We'll get into it. All we have is Doyle's word. But it does seem to be that, yes, Lisa and Doyle did engage in an affair. And Lisa, of course, was living with her husband and children at the time. The couple would apparently steal away to hotels together. However, you think you're having an affair, right? And you think you're all sneaky. There's always someone who knows, right? You're not as inconspicuous as you think you are, right? So there were some parishioners that really started to notice some weird behavior. So one of the first parishioners to kind of point out something hinky was, of course, a child of a parishioner. Dude, kids see more and they pick up on more than you think. So this parishioner, Cheryl Parmenter, it was her daughter who kind of pointed something out to her. She has since left Doyle's congregation. She is an ex-member. And yeah, so she said her daughter first pointed out to her that, quote, Doyle watches Lisa's butt. Of course, Cheryl, was like, what are you talking about? You're so silly. But it's kind of one of those things, right? Where when someone points something out and you didn't see that before, but now you can't not notice it. So it is after her child points this out that Cheryl can't help but pick up and notice these like signs between Doyle and Lisa, right? So yeah, as the early 90s rolled around, and yeah, Cheryl she's noticing more and more behavior, and she's like, oh my god, I think my daughter's right. She sometimes saw like some signs that actually weren't even really that subtle. Like Doyle and Lisa would just like up and leave together in the middle of the day, like leave the church when it got out, just like together in the middle of the day. And Cheryl notices this. So one day she decides that she's gonna follow Doyle and Lisa. So her and her sister, they decide to follow. They see Doyle and Lisa taken off again after church, as they always did, and so they decide to follow them. All right. They followed the pair to a very secluded wooded area, and Doyle, parked his car behind like some like pretty like big bushes to like block any view. And though Cheryl said they couldn't like physically see what they were doing, like it was pretty obviously they like at the very least were like making out in the car, if not actually having sex, right? Like I guess it was pretty obvious to her, is like all the article said. So I'm guessing probably, you're going out to the secluded woods, trying to hide behind a tree. What else are you doing, right? And so the sisters, outraged at this, they're outraged, right? Like you've got this minister telling them that like women are evil and you gotta like, be all like for God and stuff. And then like he has this like affair with a parishioner. Like they were outraged. And so believing that they were hidden, the sisters started shouting at Doyle and Lisa. They started just shouting insults and, very outrageous. And then they drove off real quick. The next day, Cheryl's sister got a phone call from Doyle, and he warned her, all right, he warned her that if she didn't repent her sins for her testimony, for her awful words that she said to him, quote, I will pray to God to turn you over to Satan for the destruction of your flesh. And it is after this that Cheryl and her sister left the church. I'm sorry, dude, like, that fool, like, called me and said that, like, I'm laughing because, like, I can't even read it. Like, how ridiculous, dude. Like, the ego to think that like you wield like a god's power, and it's just mind-boggling. So yeah, Doyle and Lisa continue the affair. Now Lisa's husband Harold, I guess he was completely in the dark about all of this, completely oblivious to it, and it wasn't until 2004 that Doyle would finally reveal the affair to Harold. So yeah, I think Doyle and Lisa engaged in an affair that lasted for quite some time, because that incident that Cheryl witnessed, that happened in like the early 90s. So I think this was like a prolonged affair. Oh, sorry, God's will. So yeah, around 2004, Doyle, he's finally going to reveal to Harold about the affair, all right? Well, actually, he was going to inform Harold that, hey, God actually gave me Lisa, and he has for a while, so sorry, bro. Like, he was gonna break the news to him, right? So there's like this bizarre outreach, all right, that Doyle and his ministry did, and it was organized by him, the Statons, and another church couple, all right? So they would charter a private jet and fly to all 48 continental states, and they were gonna go preach their word. They're gonna preach that word, again, to get rid of that Jezebel spirit and get rid of demons, all right? That was like their outreach, all right? So they would fly to a city in their private chartered jet, and then fly back. All right, April 2004, they're on a flight to Boise. All right, they're going to do some more outreaching. And this is when Doyle informs Harold about everything. Now, Doyle claims that when he informed Harold of God's will, according to Doyle, again, Lisa denied everything right then and there. And I think it is around, like, after this, I think that Lisa broke off the affair with Doyle. Because again, according to Doyle, Lisa didn't have the, quote, courage to break away. And it was right after this incident that Doyle came clean to his congregation and informed them that God had given him a new wife, and it was going all the way back to like 1987. Doyle claimed that his marriage to his first wife Patty was, quote, in the flesh, whereas his marriage with Lisa was, quote, of the spirit. It was pure. Now, when Doyle came clean to his congregation about this, there were a few members that left the church. They were outraged, just like Cheryl and her sister were. And it is after this, right, where Lisa breaks things off, he comes clean to his congregation, pisses off quite a few, and so quite a few people leave, that Doyle starts, like, stalking Lisa. He was completely obsessed with her. He cyberstalked her, sending her lots of emails. They were sexually suggestive, on top of threatening. And not only would he email and, like, send Lisa these letters, he would post these letters on his website. He would preach constantly in his sermons about demons who were keeping his, quote, wife from him. In fact, dude, his behavior got so creepy, he bought a house down the street from Lisa and Harold. However, this escalation would make headlines. On September 9th, 2004, Doyle went to the Stanton home, okay? Now, he wanted to demand that Lisa stop this charade and come home and be his wife. Now, Lisa, of course, was, refused to open the door for Doyle, but I was a little confused about this. I guess Harold answered the door and let Doyle in, so I was a little confused about that little detail. Like, I don't know if Harold was in the dark about him stalking his wife or what. Don't know why he would let Doyle into the house, but he lets Doyle into the house, right? And Lisa was upstairs in the bedroom. And so Doyle went upstairs, and when he found Lisa, he threw her onto, like, the little couch that was in their room and started choking her. Now, Harold heard Lisa scream because she was able to scream out as, Doyle came lunging at her, and he dashed upstairs and walked in on Doyle straight up trying to choke his wife. Now, according to Doyle, he was not choking her, all right? He was trying to choke the spirit of Jezebel out of her, all right? Big difference. Okay, Doyle. When Harold lunged at Doyle to get him off his wife, Doyle took a swing at Harold, who ducked, and he said that he could just smell alcohol on Doyle's breath. It just reeked of alcohol. The Stantons called police, and Doyle was charged with public intoxication and assault. However, after this, the Stantons refused to cooperate with authorities, so the assault charges were dropped, and all Doyle had to do was pay a $352 fine for public intoxication. Now, after this incident, Doyle fired the Stantons. I guess they were still working for the church up to this point, but he fired them after this. And his obsession with Lisa just grew. Like, she was a focal point in all of his sermons. In fact, his behavior became so alarming and so obsessive, the Stantons actually went into hiding, and their current whereabouts are actually unknown. Doyle said that the last interaction he had with the couple was in June of 2005. And I guess at this last interaction, he said that Lisa went off on him. And the reason why throughout this I kept saying according to Doyle and Doyle said is because obviously he's the only person we have that has said his side of the story. Lisa has released one public statement, and that's it. And it read, quote, Doyle Davidson has been speaking many things on and off his TV broadcast sometime about me, Lisa, and has also written things on his news of interest page. It is not the Spirit of God speaking out of his mouth. Doyle is speaking by a witchcraft divination spirit. Many wicked things have been said and done in private by Doyle to me, in which I will not go into details because God sees, hears, and he knows. And that is the only public statement that Lisa has ever released. So yeah, that is the church and the minister that the Schlossers started attending, guys. And that is why I really wanted to go into Doyle Davidson and who he is, because Dina would end up becoming a hardcore fanatical follower of his, all right? Her and John would end up becoming deeply involved in the church. And I just thought it was important to know who exactly and what exactly is it that the Schlossers, became entranced with. Yeah, that was it. Water of Life Church, run by Doyle Davidson, all right? Now, John Schlosser would describe Doyle as a family confidant and a friend, a close friend. And like I said, Dina was a fanatical follower. She was obsessed, y'all. Obsessed with Doyle and his sermons. She would send tapes of his sermons to friends and family who, more often than not, was just like, what? She would talk endlessly on about Doyle, his ministries, just everything, dude. She was obsessed. And that's all she would talk about to anyone who would listen. At one point, when she was seeing a psychiatrist, again, we'll get into it, she told the psychiatrist that she thought God wanted Doyle to have her baby. She revered Doyle's words, guys, revered him. She truly believed he was like this apostle who, when he spoke, it was God speaking. And because she's such a diehard follower of Doyle, of course, she doesn't give her girls medicine. When the girls were sick, she refused to give them anything for it. She totally believed wholeheartedly that, they just had to pray and have faith. And it was enough to cure any sickness, just like Doyle said. Now, as the couple is in Plano and they're digging even deeper, spending even more time at Water of Life Church, John became a self-employed computer consultant. Other sources said that he became self-employed being a software designer. Again, kind of hard to get like some nitty-gritty details on what exactly this guy does. Just, we know it's something to do with computers. Now, I actually read that John turned down like several lucrative job offers because when I was talking about this story with Jeff, he's in the STEM field and he's, you know, his degree's in computer science. And he was talking about like, man, even with like the .com bust or whatever, like I find it hard to believe that John would have such a hard time finding a job. And yeah, it turns out, according to sources, that John actually turned down some pretty lucrative job offers. And I guess he would turn these offers down, like, yeah, if they weren't like good enough for him and if they didn't have like his specific interests, which normally I would say like, yeah, go for it. You know what I mean? Especially if you've built a career, but it's like at the same time, you have kids to feed. So a friend said that he actually got John a job at Hitachi's Dallas office, but John turned it down. And why? Because he thought it was for being the head of the IT department, okay, which is what he deserved, according to this friend, is what John said. But the friend was like, bro, you're like grossly underqualified. You don't even have a college degree. Of course this isn't to like run the whole ID department. And like, yeah, John wasn't interested after that. It's just like, what? He told this friend that God is going to provide the perfect position for him, all right? God would provide all. And it said that Dina worked as well, but she too willy-nilly like quit jobs like nothing. I guess she like quit working at customer service at Visa because a customer was rude to her. She walked off during her shift at Ameritrade because I guess a client had lied to her. And she quit a nursing home job because she had issues with how they were treating some of the patients. That one I don't blame her for. Dina did work at a daycare center in Plano, and it was called Children's World Learning Center, and a mother who took her 3-year-old there often to Dina. She described that Dina was, quote, sweet. She was really, really nice. So whereas in Fort Worth, Dina's friends were saying that she was kind of withdrawing a little bit, not being as sociable or outgoing, she was described by neighbors in Plano as being just that, very sociable and friendly. The girls attended Lone Star Elementary School, and much like in Fort Worth, here, both John and Dina were very active in the PTA, and they also volunteered for their neighborhood association. So it seemed like they were back to, you know, the way that their Fort Worth neighbors had originally described them, you know? A neighbor who lived across the street named Janine Johanningmeyer, that was really tough to say. So she lived across the street, and her sons attended the same school, but her kids were a little bit older, so they weren't, like, active friends with the Schlossers. But, you know, she saw them around the neighborhood all the time and saw how active they were. And she said, quote, they seemed nice enough. They were really involved in the community. You'd see them out playing with their kids. They seemed like a nice family. Dina took her girls swimming. Family was seen having picnics in the courtyard. And Dina was always there to pick her daughters up from school, with little baby Margaret in tow. Another neighbor who lived near them, Brad Livingston, he said, quote, to see her with those girls, you would just think she was a great mother. Now, it doesn't seem like everything is all peaches and cream here. There are members of Dina's family who do accuse John of, like, isolating Dina at this time, especially as they delved deeper and deeper into Doyle's doctrine, which, remember, mandated that women are subservient to men. And if they're not, they're obviously infected with the Jezebel spirit. Medicine isn't needed as long as you have faith. And mental illness is caused by demons, all right? So, yeah, around all this time, there are members of Dina's family who were not quite happy with how things are going right now. I guess one time when Brianna was sick with a cough, Connie, you know, Dina's mother, was over. And I guess Connie at one point was a former nurse. She was a nurse at one point, and she tried to give Brianna some Robitussin cough syrup. But Dina just threw the bottle in the trash and said that they don't use that stuff in her house. They relied on prayer, okay? I guess when Brock, remember Dina's brother, when he was about 12, because remember, he's significantly younger than Dina. So when he was 12, I guess Connie and Mick and him were visiting Dina and John. And remember, this is after their part of Water of Life. And I guess John was like just going on and on about like how he owed Dina and stuff. And like, yeah, I don't know what was said or like what was going on, but yeah, John was pretty much being like a misogynistic prick. And like Brock was like, you know, telling him, was like, what, like, you can't own people. What the hell's wrong with you? And like debating him. Yeah, Connie was not a fan of what was happening with her daughter. It was starting to worry her. She didn't like not just how much Dina was invested in the church, but like, yeah, Dina was keeping her daughters up late during school nights to go to church. She was skipping meals, and her daughters were skipping meals because they were at church. They were spending upwards. I read one report that was like claiming like $16,000, 17 hours at the church, guys. Like, what? What? Like, dude, great to have like a hobby and faith and stuff, but my lord. Now, it said Connie tried to confront Doyle herself because like she knew that her daughter was like obsessed with this guy. Remember I said Dina was mailing his sermons to like anyone, to all of her family and friends. And yeah, Connie was not a fan of this guy. She's like, who the heck is this D-bag? And it is said that she tried to confront Doyle herself face to face. Like, I don't know what she was gonna do, but yeah, it is said that she confronted Doyle herself. So at this time, remember, Connie's suffering from Parkinson's, right? So even though she's suffering from Parkinson's, she's worried about her daughter. And so yeah, she had flown out, didn't like that her daughter wasn't giving her granddaughter's medicine, and yeah, was skipping meals and stuff. And so she had, was like, well, let me confront this Doyle guy. Maybe I can talk some sense into him. And of course, I mean, Doyle is a misogynist through and through. You think he appreciated a woman going off on him? No. Doyle told Connie that people who oppose him end up disappearing. Yeah. Like he's like some big, bad, tough, macho guy. So yeah, obviously this confrontation, was to no avail. You think you can reason with a guy like that? Of course not. So Connie was like, all right, I gotta go home. It's time to go home. She was, frustrated, but, what could she do, right? So Dina and John drive Connie to the airport, all right, and they drop her off. But get this, all right, so when she's waiting for her plane, it's time to take her medicine, and she realizes her medicine for her Parkinson's, it's missing. It's missing. And this caused poor Connie to completely, freeze and lock up. She was frozen, stiff, couldn't move, couldn't communicate. Can you imagine how frightening that would be? She ended up spending the whole night paralyzed at the airport, guys. The whole night. She sat in her own excrement, because of course she had to go to the restroom, and I doubt she could have even controlled it. Yeah, she sat there all night at the airport. It wasn't until the next day when someone, I think it was an airport employee, but someone noticed that she was in distress, and they ended up, identifying her. They were able to find her luggage, and out of it, they were able to dig out some extra medication that she had. And then, so they gave her medication, and then she recovered, and they put her on her plane back home, which was Chicago at this point. Yeah, can you believe that? Yeah, John and Dina had taken her medication. So when Dina became pregnant with her third child, she was working at the daycare center, and she left the daycare center on maternity leave. Now, it is said, after her third pregnancy and all this, Dina's mental health, which was already, questionable, really took a decline. Now, there were some who accused John of forcing Dina to leave the daycare center, forcing her to quit, and, not allowing her to work at all. So I was a little confused about that. If she just had taken off on maternity leave, or if, John forced her and she wasn't gonna come back. Now, the news of the third pregnancy was unexpected, all right? And at this point, the Schlossers were already having trouble making ends meet with two mouths to feed, plus themselves. And yeah, a third mouth, of course, was just going to add to their troubles. However, though there were stresses, it is said that Dina exhibited all of the outward behavior that you would think of any expectant mother to exhibit, Dina ended up giving birth at home to baby Margaret with a midwife, although it is said it was a pretty difficult birth. Even the midwife in the middle of the pregnancy, because of course it was at home, so it was natural, no medicine or anything. And I don't know if Dina was bleeding a lot or what, but even the midwife was like, oh, we need to go to the hospital. We should probably take her. But John and Dina both refused. Now, after baby Margaret was born in January of 2004, Dina would struggle with her mental health from this point onward. It would never be the same. Now, Dina believed that when she'd given birth to baby Margaret, in actuality, she had given birth to twins. That's what she believed. A boy and a girl. But the boy had already been returned to God. All right? That's what she believed. The day after Margaret had been born, so January 10th, Dina, all right, so she's reading the Bible, because she reads it a lot, and she's reading it, and all of a sudden, the word cut jumped out at her. Literally jumped off the page in this giant word, cut. Kept repeating itself. Cut, cut, cut. And after that, Dina attempted suicide by cutting her wrists with scissors. It is said that John found her in the bathroom, bleeding, holding baby Margaret, but rather than take her to the hospital, they wrapped her wounds up in some gauze or bandages or something and prayed to God to heal her wounds. Which I guess these cuts weren't that serious, which is why they were able to, pack them with gauze and she didn't bleed out, But I'm sure they believed it was God. There were other articles that said that she was actually treated at Collin County ER, and here she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So not quite sure. Now, according to medical records, Dina was treated for postpartum depression for most of 2004. She had officially been diagnosed in January, all right? And this was after CPS had to investigate a claim of neglect. And this was only days after baby Margaret was born, guys. So on January 15th, again, 2004, Dina was seen by neighbors screaming and yelling down the street. And she was, quote, yelling at the top of her lungs. And she was screaming that there was a, quote, spirit in her apartment. She was followed by then 5-year-old Kelsey, who was like running after her. Other articles said that she was biking after her on her bike, but either way, Kelsey was chasing after her mother, who's 5, by the way. She's a 5-year-old. Brianna, the oldest, she was at school at this time. Now, when CPS and the police arrived on scene, Kelsey told them that their mother had left her and her 6-day-old sister, Margaret, in the house alone. And when the police caught up to Dina, 2 miles away, she was on a street corner. She was described as being, quote, despondent. She was like, I guess, like shouting, and like when people tried to approach her, she just like screamed at the top of her lungs. She appeared to be, quote, suffering from postpartum depression. Yeah, you think? So Dina, she told police the reason she had run out of her house was that Kelsey, all right, she was watching The Little Mermaid, all right, on TV. She was watching The Little Mermaid, and the characters all of a sudden turned towards Dina and started laughing at her. And this made her feel traumatized and scared to the point that she ran out of the house. Man, can you imagine your mind turning on you like that? Oh my God. Now, when police then got a hold of John and informed him of the situation, he reportedly was kind of like not all that alarmed, said that, this was in God's hands now. And, everything would work out. Police noted that, yeah, he seemed pretty unemotional and like disinterested in this whole thing. Yeah, no, God will take care of it. What? After this incident, Dina was then taken to Collin County Hospital, and over the next 24 hours, 3 doctors from Medical City of Dallas, Medical Center of Plano, and Green Oaks Hospital, so doctors from these 3 different hospitals, they all determined that Dina was psychotic or suffering from psychosis, in addition to her postpartum depression. One of these doctors said that Dina was suffering from delusional thoughts, but Dina did deny that she was suicidal. Dina was prescribed a psychotropic drug. It was called Haldol, and she was also prescribed Ativan at some point. And I know at some point she was taken off the medication. I'm not sure when. Now, while at the hospital, Dina felt that something wasn't right. Yeah, it said that she felt that something wasn't right with her. And she didn't want to be released. That is what it said. It just said that at this point, Dina did not want to be released from the hospital. But John had told her that he had prayed on it, all right? And God told him that this was just a simple case of demonic possession. That's all it was. She didn't need the hospital. So Dina was released, and she was to have no unsupervised visits with her children. One of her daughters had called her mother's suicide attempt the, quote, devil's trick. So, I think authorities were rightfully concerned. And because John worked long hours, and, Dina couldn't be alone with her children, John's mother came from New York to stay with the family. Another few sources said that it was John's sister, but seems to be a relative of John's came to stay with them. And they ended up staying for 6 weeks, and a counselor checked in with Dina every day. Now, again, it is said in the days following her release as well, again, Dina felt that something wasn't right with her. She didn't feel right. And it is said that she wanted to go back to the hospital. A few days after being released, I guess Dina had a night where she couldn't sleep, and she attempted to walk to Green Oaks Hospital in the middle of the night. On the way, she stopped at a payphone and called John, but I guess he talked her down and talked her out of going. And after she got home in a prayer session, John concluded that Dina did not require medical attention. Now, after some time, I'm unclear of when, if it was just for like that 6 weeks or what, but after some time, CPS deemed that Dina could have unsupervised visits with her children again. And John's mother or sister left in about mid-February. Now, it is said that CPS did still check in with Dina, and that they checked in every weekday. I don't know if that means just by telephone or if someone stopped by. I'm unclear. But by March, those check-ins had dwindled to just twice a week. So in February, after Dina's been released from the hospital and she's still under CPS supervision, she started seeing a a psychiatrist. And she started seeing Dr. Nazir Zaki in February. She saw Dr. Zaki for 5 sessions between February and June. Dr. Zaki worked at Life Path Systems located in McKinney, Texas. And this was a facility for low-income patients who require psychiatric care. Dina had been referred there after her diagnosis. Now, Dr. Zaki only saw Dina once a month for 15 minutes after an initial 45-minute meeting. Dr. Zaki knew of Dina's suicide attempt the day after Margaret's birth, and he described Dina as, quote, hyper-religious. He said that she suffered from both delusions and postpartum depression. She told Dr. Zaki that she read the Bible a lot, which scared her. She couldn't sleep, and she said that the reason she had slit her wrists that day after Margaret had been born, the reason she did this was to show, quote, God that he was important. He was first. So as her sessions went on, Dr. Zaki prescribed Dina the antipsychotic Haldol and also prescribed her Benadryl, but Dana refused to take this medication, saying that she was breastfeeding, and instead she opted for some homeopathic, like, herbal remedies. And by March, she was still seeing Dr. Zaki, and yeah, remember, CPS's visits had dwindled to just twice-a-week check-ins. Whether that was on the phone or in person, do not know. Now, in May, another source said that it was in March, but other sources said May. So in May, Dina left her home in the middle of the night, once again, and went to the nearby medical center of Plano. No one knows quite sure, why she did this, why she wanted to go there. And I'm still a little confused on if she made it there. All it said was that, yeah, she was heading towards here, but then she was found in the bathroom, screaming and suffering from psychosis. So I don't know if that was a bathroom at the center, if she made it there, or a bathroom somewhere else. So yeah, maybe she did make it to the medical center, because it did say that doctors there diagnosed her as psychotic, but rather than Dina be transferred to Green Oaks Hospital as what would have normally been done, John had talked the doctors into releasing Dina into the custody of Dr. Zaki. Now, there are notes that physicians took that said John felt that the best place for Dina right now was home, and he reportedly told doctors, quote, Dina's spiritual church vocabulary may be mixed up, and she will be perceived as, quote, being crazy. He told the doctors they could contact their church about any, quote, aberrant beliefs. And according to the doctor's notes, John, quote, does not want the religious beliefs to be confused with psychosis. Yeah, because that's the important thing right now, right? That is what should be priority right now. Once again, John said he had prayed on it, and he determined that God had told him that Dina would be just fine at home. She didn't need a hospital. Now, it should be noted that though John said, oh no, you can release her into the care of Dr. Zaki, the Schlossers neglected to inform Dr. Zaki of this incident, that she'd been found on the bathroom floor, screaming and under the state of psychosis. And by the way, at this point, Dr. Zaki had just written a letter of recommendation to CPS saying that Dina was improving. And they also neglected to inform Dr. Zaki of Dina's deterioration that was happening. He didn't know. He only saw her once a month for 15 minutes, Dr. Zaki said he started Dina on Haldol. We mentioned that before. And I don't know if she started to take it this time. I don't know if she was done breastfeeding at this point or what. It just said that, yeah, after she was released into his care, he prescribed her Haldol. And get this, CPS was also not notified of this incident. Yeah, so even though they still kept tabs on Dina, I guess, after March, they still kept some loose form of contact on her. They were not aware of this incident. Dina finally stopped seeing Dr. Zaki in July, and this was when she was incorrectly informed that she was going to have to start paying $50 a session. And this was actually a mistake. This was an error, and no one from Life Paths, no one, called Dina to inform her of this mistake. Yeah, by August of that same year, Dina had been deemed, quote, stable by CPS, who said she, quote, seemed to be doing well. And this was after a psychiatrist had deemed that Dina's mental health had improved. It was probably that letter from Dr. Zaki. CPS did urge Dina to take individual counseling, but she and John both flat out refused. And yeah, it is during this time period when, yeah, she was released and CPS was keeping tabs on her and all that. It was during this time period that Dina had actually taken baby Margaret back to Fort Worth to, show her off to her old friends and neighbors. One friend/neighbor named Crystal Grant, she said, quote, "She brought that baby back here at 3 months and at 6 months. She breastfed that baby. She said she was born with a midwife and that it was a beautiful, miraculous birth. But after August, when CPS, deemed that Dina was stable, they had no more contact with her after that. Her old Fort Worth community had no more contact with her after that. And though CPS may have thought Dina was stable, the truth was she was not, obviously. So instead of following up on doctors, medications, counseling, the Schlossers just delved more and more into their church, relied more and more on prayer and faith. Though she had been prescribed medication, it said Dina refused to take it, and she cited Doyle's church doctrine about medicine being witchcraft and mental illness being of demons. Dina wasn't sleeping. She was obsessively reading the Bible. We mentioned that earlier. And unbeknownst to anyone else, Dina was suffering from mass hallucinations. And they were, of course, religious in theme. It is said John also kept Dina's family in the dark about what was going on with her, just how bad things were getting. Like, he kept them completely in the dark. When Carolyn Thomas, who was a friend and a fellow Water of Life churchgoer, when she asked John if Dina was taking her medication, he told her not to, quote, pressure him. And in fact, there are reports that both Dina and John begged Dr. Zaki and other psychiatrists to take Dina off the Haldol. Though there are reports that, it indicated the medication was, helping her. It was, vastly improving her. And maybe that's why she came off as such a normal, loving mother to everyone, She was taking her meds. There were other incidents that occurred that proved Dina's mental health was greatly deteriorating. Apparently at some point during the summer, a little boy asked her for a glass of water. Don't know the context, if it was at home, church, or what. Don't have the context. Just that a little boy had asked Dina for a glass of water, and Dina thought this little boy was Jesus Christ. In another incident, Dina saw a news story about a lion who had mauled a child, and she thought that this was a sign of the apocalypse. And it was also around this time that her mental health is deteriorating that for the first time, Dina hears the voice of God, and she heard him tell her to cut off baby Margaret's arms, and then cut off her own arms as a tribute to him. Towards the middle, / end of November 2004, Dina had another episode. So in the middle of the night, get this, Dina took baby Margaret for a walk in the stroller, all right? She's walking around her neighborhood in the dead of night. She walked her neighborhood streets, and that's when Dina heard something. She heard the whir of a small engine, and Dina's mind interpreted this sound to mean that they were constructing an ark nearby, and she walked up and down the street and the block for hours, trying to find this mysterious ark builder. She believed that God wanted this ark builder to have baby Margaret, but Dina never found the builder, never found the ark, and she returned home downtrodden and depressed. She was so bummed out. She told John about what she thought she heard and what she thought, and John just told her, quote, "God brought you home." And then, about a week before the events of today's case, Dina had yet another episode. This one was in front of her friend Carolyn. Now, Carolyn was aware of Dina's mental health struggles, and she had even told her, quote, "Talk to me when those crazy ideas start rattling around in your head. And girl, stay on your medication." She was reportedly at the home when Dina had given birth to baby Margaret, unclear if she was the midwife or she just happened to be there for support. And Carolyn also lived across the street from the Schlossers. Carolyn and Dina's relationship was described as sort of a mother-daughter one. Carolyn was a little bit older than Dina. The women both attended Water of Life. It is said they attended 6 days a week, and twice on Sundays for as many as 16 hours of services a week. Both were devout followers of Doyle. Although, Carolyn must not have agreed with the medicine part, because remember, she was encouraging Dina to take hers. She was inquiring John, hey, is she taking her medication? So she must not agree with that part. Carolyn said that both John and Dina were fanatics of Doyle, and she thought that John took the submissive wife stuff way too far. She accused John of trying to keep Dina in, quote, a little box. Carolyn said she tried to get her friend to stand up for herself, but there was a problem because Dina also took the submissive wife role to the extreme. Dina told Karen that she feared the spirit of Jezebel was within her. Carolyn would chastise John, telling him that he needed to step up more, ensure Dina took her medication, and that it wouldn't kill him to get off the computer and actually help raise his kids. And Carolyn was so adamant about Dina being up on her medication is because Dina was a lot like a lot of mentally ill people, where she would take the medication and feel better and then think, oh, well, I don't need this anymore. So that was one of the reasons she was always trying to be up on on it, like, hey, are you taking your medication? So yeah, it was just kind of weird that, like, Carolyn was this follower of Doyle, was, like, you know, loyal and stuff, but yeah, she didn't seem to put up with, like, the submissive role all that much, like, especially chastising John and stuff, and saying that they took that part of the doctrine to the extreme. I just thought that was interesting. It also seems she didn't believe with the medicine stuff either, you know what I mean? This chick's interesting. She said, quote, I'm a Jezebel, but I keep it under control. I'm only a Jezebel when I need to be, when I need to stand up for what's right. So yeah, this chick's definitely interesting. So yeah, Carolyn was well aware of Dina's situation. So about a week before the events of today's case, Dina, Carolyn, and the girls, they were all leaving the church one evening, all right? And as soon as they all got into Dina's car, Dina, I guess, like, started acting strange. She started mumbling, almost chanting, and, like, saying stuff under her breath. And she was saying, quote, I'm stupid, I'm evil, over and over. And I don't know if, like, Carolyn didn't notice this, but, like, it is said that, like, as they were driving, Dina closed her eyes and started saying like she was a snake or something. And, you know, Carolyn snapped at Dina and telling her to open her eyes and look at the road. Quote, put your mind on Jesus. I think Dina opened her eyes and pulled over, but I guess Carolyn continued talking to Dina, talking her down. And she would later say that she felt a, quote, foul spirit in the air, a demon of depression. She voiced this to Dina, who agreed. And it is then that the two women started praying. So yeah, I think Dina probably pulled over the car at this point. And yeah, they prayed out loud, and this seemed to calm Dina down. And that's when she asked Carolyn if she knew if demons could come into your house and, like, disrupt it. Like, was that something they could do? Carolyn said that she did believe that. And it was what she was raised to believe with her religion, that spirits can get into people and use them for wrong. Carolyn specifically told Dina, quote, spirits can get into your baby, husbands, relatives. Yeah, so yeah, she was like, yeah, I absolutely believe in demons and that they could, you know, seep in. So yeah, I guess Dina calmed down a little bit more, and so they continued driving on. They stopped at a grocery store, and Carolyn said by the time that she got back out to the car, I don't know if Dina went in with her, but Dina appeared to be, you know, back to normal. And then another incident, Sunday, November 21st, 2004, after walking out of a church service, Dina, holding baby Margaret, looks over to John and said she wanted to, quote, give her child to God, or to Doyle as a bride. And keep in mind, just for perspective, when Dina is saying this, that incident with Lisa, where Doyle was trying to strangle her, had already happened. In his sermon that day, Doyle had ridiculed the Plano police, said everything about him was a set-up concoction. It was all set up by demons. You know, like the usual drivel that he would say. Afterwards, or after this sermon, Dina was incensed. She couldn't believe that this was happening. She wondered if maybe she should go down to the police and clear Doyle's name herself. John, of course, knowing this wasn't a good idea, reportedly took Dina to Doyle, who, it is said, assured her that he could handle himself. He appreciated it, but He got this. He didn't need her help. Now, after this, as they walked back to the car, Dina was insistent on giving Margaret to Doyle, which meant giving her to God. She felt that Margaret was meant to be Doyle's future bride. And John, of course, is not loving this idea. And trying to convince him, Dina references a Bible story in which I guess like a woman promises her baby to God or something. And this started an argument. And it got so bad, they actually went and searched for one of the church's ministers to, you know, kind of mediate this. They all prayed together, and the minister told Dina that she was interpreting that Bible passage incorrectly. John said that he assumed the matter was all settled because after this, Dina settled down and dropped the matter. The couple headed to the hardware store afterwards, and at the hardware store is where Dina suffers another hallucination, or delusion, but no one knows. So when they're at the hardware store, Dina saw John put baby Margaret in the cart, and, you know, he was kind of like playing with her, you know, like little silly, like baby coo talk and stuff, and he was playing with her arms, saying, quote, little arms, little arms. This reverberated in Dina's damaged brain and caused the wheels to start turning. She thought through, she was unhappy in her marriage. John was always angry, self-absorbed, and he had informed Dina that they were going to move to Grapevine, Texas, away from Carolyn, away from the church, and they would only be able to attend the church a couple of times a week at most. Dina felt her world closing in on her. She had to overcome this Jezebel spirit that was within her, and she had to make a new start. She was incomplete, and parts of herself and baby Margaret, they would combine into a new whole. God would heal them into a new whole. Then Doyle could marry Margaret as he was supposed to. The baby John never really wanted would be gone. John would be happy again, and everything would be just and right. This is what's going through Dina's mind when she sees John putting Margaret in that cart. Yeah. There are reports that say when the Schlossers got home that day, there are reports that say one of the children told police that when they got home, John, quote, spanked Dina with a wooden spoon, and this was because she argued with him in public, and it was to curb her rebellion. And even after this argument, John still refuses to seek professional mental help. So the next morning, Monday, November 22nd, while John was at work in Arlington, which confused me because I thought he was self-employed, but maybe he had an office there, but he was at work in Arlington, and the two older girls were in school, leaving Dina and baby Margaret home alone. Dina went into the kitchen, grabbed a 9-inch butcher's knife, and then went into baby Margaret's bedroom and stood over her baby. Margaret was in her crib. Dina stands over her with the knife, and she began cutting baby Margaret's arms off at the shoulder. I read that little Margaret actually bled out and died before Dina had even finished cutting off the first arm. Baby Margaret died with one hand clenched in a fist and the other in an open palm. Both arms were severed from baby Margaret's body. Dina then turned the knife on herself and started cutting her own shoulder. But she stopped when she got too deep because the pain was just too much to bear. She then phoned John at work and told him what she had done. She told him she had cut off Margaret's arms. John then called Doyle, who recommended that he go call someone to go check on Dina. John then called the daycare center where Dina had worked, and his call came in at the daycare center at 11:50 a.m., and Carolyn picked up. Carolyn also worked with Dina at the daycare center. She had worked with her for about a year. John explained the situation to Carolyn, what Dina had told him, and he asked her to go check on her, and that he was on his way home right now, but he was in Arlington. After hanging up with John, Carolyn immediately called up Dina, and she said Dina answered, and she was eerily calm. Carolyn could hear gospel music playing in the background. Carolyn asked her what she had done with her baby, and Dina answered, quote, I killed her. And when Carolyn asked, like, what? Dina, who took a long time to answer, said, quote, I cut her arms off. And she repeated this when Carolyn again was like, what? When Carolyn asked her where Margaret was now, Dina said, quote, in the crib. She's dead. I cut her arms off. But even still, right, Carolyn was worried, but she still didn't really believe that Dina had actually done this, she thought she was just having another episode. So Carolyn hung up, called John back, repeated that conversation, and at this point a bunch of the daycare workers were kind of like gathered and huddled around because like they were just like, whoa, what's going on? These people knew Dina, they were scared of what was happening, they were just like, what's going on? A supervisor ended up calling 911 and explaining the situation, and a 911 dispatcher then called Dina. The dispatcher named Steve Edwards, he was the one who ended up calling Dina, and she picked up. When he asked her if there was an emergency, Dina replied, quote, yes. When he asked Dina what exactly happened, she told him, quote, I cut her arms off. It said the hymn He Touched Me was playing in the background. Steve then, asked, quote, you cut her arms off? And Dina just sort of, is said to have replied like, uh-huh, like kind of like in a eerily calm, dazed kind of way. When police arrived at the Schlosser residence, they found Dina inside her apartment, sitting in the living room at her computer table, and she was reading the Bible. Specifically, she was reading Matthew 5:30, and it reads, quote, if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from there. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. Dina had been trying to make sense of this verse for like the past 3 days now, and now she felt she had clarity on it. She had its meaning. When police found her, this is what she was poring over. This was the verse. She was covered in blood, her own and Margaret's. Again, remember, she attempted to cut off her own arm, but stopped. She left the knife in the gaping deep gash in her shoulder. Church hymn was still playing on the radio or on the stereo in the background, and some sources said that the hymn playing was Thank You Jesus, Thank You Lord. One of the officers, Plano Officer David Tilley, he approached Dina and wrenched the knife from her shoulder. Meanwhile, other officers had stormed through the apartment and they found baby Margaret. She was lying in her crib in her bedroom towards the back of the house. Her arms were severed at the shoulder and she was dead. Her official cause of death was listed as, quote, sharp force amputation of the upper extremities. There was blood everywhere. About 40% of the crib was said to have just been covered in blood. There were about 50 nicks and pricks on the side of baby Margaret's face, and this indicated that Dina had used a sawing motion when she cut the arms, and that baby Margaret, of course, flailed around and screamed due to the pain and hit across the knife, and that's how she got these facial injuries. It is said the scene was horrifying and traumatizing for officers. When Officer Tilly asked Dina questions, she would answer, but only questions about herself, not questions related to Margaret. When he asked her why she had cut off Margaret's arms, Dina said, quote, "I felt like I had to," and she refused to speak further. Officer Tilly said Dina's behavior was very strange. She smiled at random times, hummed the hymn that had been playing, and every now and then would whisper and say, "Thank you, God," and "Praise God." She also growled, prayed, and screamed, and when she was taken to the hospital for her injuries, it is said she asked God for forgiveness. Yeah, she was definitely having quite a break here. At first, no one knew why Dina would do this to Margaret. No one knew. It was a complete shock to everyone. And in the immediate aftermath, investigators were stumped. Dina had no criminal record, was church-going, was a devoted wife and mother, had 2 older daughters. All of her Fort Worth and Plano friends and neighbors, they just couldn't reconcile with like the woman that they knew and the woman they were reading about in the papers. After Dina was arrested and taken to Colley County Jail, she was charged with capital murder. The other 2 daughters who were at school and unharmed were taken into CPS custody, and CPS then requested a judge terminate both John and Dina's parental rights. They accused John of failing to protect his children from their mother. A caseworker named Jennifer Lang, she interviewed John, alright? And she would later tell the court, quote, "He did not appear to be alarmed by the comment," referring that Dina had made to give Margaret to God or Doyle, "or see it as a sign that Schlosser would harm their child." John reportedly said that the conversation they had that day, it wasn't unusual because Dina, quote, "is very religious but often misinterprets scriptures." But a week later, in December, though the daughters remained in foster care, CPS was no longer seeking to terminate John's parental rights, though they were still unclear if he should be entrusted with their custody. Their whole argument was basically that, like, dude, like, he should have totally foreseen that something was going to happen. Not just with her past mental episodes, but specifically the comments she had made the day before Margaret's murder. You know what I mean? On December 4th, a judge ruled that CPS had 45 days to determine if the girls should remain in foster care or go with their father. At that point, John had lawyered up with Howard Shapiro, and he was fighting for custody. He agreed to take parental counseling courses, psychological evals, and even to submit to random drug and alcohol tests. His lawyer Shapiro said, quote, "We'll undergo any test and counseling session to show he's a good man and good father and deserves to have his children." Nothing in his parenting skills led to this horrible event, but he understands that he needs to ensure to everyone that his children will be safe with him. During that 45-day time period, John was allowed 2 hours a week supervised visitations with his children. CPS, I guess, was also looking at John's sister, who lived in upstate New York, as a potential guardian. John did end up regaining temporary custody of his daughters, and that was in January of 2005. But it was under the condition that his sister live with him. And on February 11th, 2005, at a hearing to determine if he should get sole custody, a psychologist who interviewed John, named Jana R. Long, she argued that John should have done more to get his wife mental help, and that he showed a, quote, disturbing lack of emotion when she interviewed him. She said, quote, "This absence of grief is either an immature denial of normal human emotions that hover under the surface of his controlled veneer, or indicates a true lack of emotion." I guess in the discussions, John told Dr. Long that he felt, quote, "a little melancholy about Margaret's death, but found comfort in the fact that she was, quote, praising God. He told her he was, quote, almost done being very sad when I buried her." But despite this analysis from Dr. Long, the judge ruled that John could have sole custody of his 2 daughters. His sister moved out of the home the following week, though she was to maintain regular phone contact with the girls. Now, Shapiro disputed Dr. Long's assessment, saying, quote, "If you think John Schlosser hasn't grieved, you'd be wrong. Maybe he hasn't cried openly on TV. Maybe he hasn't jumped up and down and ripped his clothes off, but he's grieved." John would end up moving to Weatherford, Texas with his 2 girls. Meanwhile, Dina refused to cooperate with police after she was arrested. It is said that when she was first brought in, she was put on suicide watch, obviously. She banged her head against the cell walls, feared that an all-out apocalypse was, like, actively happening outside. The only 2 people she would allow to visit her was her husband John and Doyle. Doyle actually talked with Dina the night she was arrested, but we do not know what about. When he was interviewed by the press, Doyle claimed that he didn't know the Schlossers all that well at all and really tried to distance himself from them, tried to say that they were ministered and counseled by many different people at Water of Life, and he didn't really know them. And in fact, he didn't even know anyone who socialized with them. He said Dina had come to church more often than John, and said, quote, "I'd say hello, but that was about it. I don't think anybody here," referring to the church, "had that much contact with them." Okay. Doyle did talk about ministering to John after the incident. He said John seemed emotionally stable, was seeking answers, and was worried about God's judgment against Dina. Doyle said, quote, "He's concerned overall about why this happened and what would happen to her, and how does God view her right now. He asked me, what is God saying now?" Doyle told the paper that he believed God used the justice system, and he used the justice system to enact his will. And he told John, quote, "We'll have to watch the court system and how it works out." In December, Dina's lawyer, David Haynes, he asked a judge for a, quote, "reasonable bond," arguing that Dina had no prior criminal record and had a close ties to the community. However, her bond was denied, and on Valentine's Day, February 14th, just a few days after John had gotten sole custody, Dina had a competency hearing to determine if she could stand trial. Since her arrest, Dina had been diagnosed with manic depression, schizoaffective disorder, which I Googled real quick, and they described it as a disorder that combines depressive mood swings with schizophrenic delusions. Ugh, that sucks. So she was diagnosed with that. During the hearing, testimony was heard from several law enforcement officials, 2 psychiatrists, and Dina's stepfather, Robert, who now lived in North Carolina. Robert testified to Dina's medical trauma as a child, said that she was a loving and concerned mother, and he did note that phone calls from her had gotten less and less over the years. One of the other psychiatrists who testified, David Self, he said that Dina had told him in the months and days leading up to the murder, she was reading the Bible 5 to 7 days straight with no to minimal sleep. When they were discussing the possibility of the death penalty, he said, quote, "She stated that it would be fine. If God needed her life, she was ready to give it to him." Both psychiatrists testified that Dina's depression had gotten worse as her sessions continued, and after only 15 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Dina not competent enough to stand trial. As a result, Dina was sent to the North Texas State Hospital in Vernon, and she was sent here for 120 days of observation and treatment. There, experts would determine when and if Dina was mentally competent enough to stand trial. Her attorney, Haynes, told reporters that Dina still didn't fully understand what was going on, or what the hearing was even about, but knows, quote, she's on her way to the hospital. However, in May of that year, a judge reversed the jury's decision and decided that Dina was in fact mentally competent to stand trial. I read another source that the judge actually ruled this after reports from the doctors and mental health professionals said that Dina was now mentally competent enough. On February 13th, 2006, jury selection began for Dina's trial, and her trial would last for 2 weeks. She was charged for the capital murder of baby Margaret, although the prosecution had already stated they were not going to seek the death penalty. They were going to seek life imprisonment. It was expected that Dina would plead not guilty by reason of insanity, which she did. By this point, she had another defense attorney that joined Haynes, William Schultz, and they argued that Dina did not know what she was doing and was not capable of understanding the gravity of what she did. They blamed both John and Doyle's church doctrine for normalizing her outlandish behavior and blaming them for not giving her proper care and proper help. Prosecutor Curtis Howard, he disagreed with this assessment though, and he argued that even though Dina suffered from mental illness, she did know right from wrong. He played the 911 tape as evidence, as well as bringing in Steve Edwards, remember the 911 dispatcher, and he testified and recounted his conversation with Dina. Officer Tilley also testified, just basically describing the strange behavior that Dina exhibited. John took the stand as well and testified that he did indeed tell the doctors that the best place for Dina was at home. And he did admit that he may have missed some signs that his wife was mentally ill. Aw, you think, Johnny? He said he wasn't too worried, though, because she had depression with her 2 prior pregnancies. And, it was fine. He said, quote, "I had had several months of my wife slowly becoming herself again. After whatever it was that happened after Margaret was born, I was relieved to be able to have a normal conversation with her." Yeah, okay, a normal conversation. Okay. He recounted how Dina had said she wanted to give Margaret to either God or Doyle. He said, quote, "She said, I want to give the baby to Doyle. She said, I want to give the baby to God." Doyle Davidson also testified at Dina's trial. And wow. The things he said on stand, like, I mean, come on, you know this guy. I've told you about him. Are you really surprised that he would say outlandish things on the stand? So Doyle, who was 73 years old at that point, he testified that he didn't believe in mental illness. He said, quote, "I do not believe any mental illness exists that is not a manifestation of demonic activity, and no medication can never straighten out a person. Only the power of God can make a person perfectly sound." He again downplayed his closeness and relationship with the Schlossers. Even though, remember, he had been the first person John called. He was one of only 2 people Dina would allow to talk to him. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, obviously he was really trying to downplay how close he was to them, but we all know that was bull. Doyle testified that he had seen demons before. He had cast them out of parishioners. He said that he had confronted one that was 6 feet tall and 4 inches wide, and it also had a long tail. This demon told him that Lisa was not his wife. Yeah, doesn't it sound like he just, like, kind of mixed up a Supernatural episode or something? Like, yeah, he actually said this on stand, guys, in a court of law. As part of an official court transcript, he said these things. He answered questions with Bible scriptures, giving his own interpretation of them, and thanked the court for the opportunity to spread God's word. I swear. What do you do with these people? Dina's counselor, Sherry Wing, she testified as well. She said Dina thought she was supposed to die that day too, but, quote, "something went horribly wrong the day of the tragedy. She was supposed to cut off her own arm, remember? And then her own head. And she felt God had commanded her to do this." Sherry's testimony, I guess, was the first glimpse that the public got to what was going on in Dina's mind as she was doing this. Dina told Sherry that she suffered hallucinations, many of them religious in tone. She said words floated off the pages of the Bible. Characters from television shows turned to the screen and talked to her. She saw blood on the street. The blood would then turn into apostles, and these apostles would tell Dina, quote, "It is the end of days. Get ready." She heard her dead grandparents' voices coming from behind doors, and she had a hallucination where a woman in a commercial told her that she was going to crawl out of the TV and replace her, Dina, the defective mother, and that she, Dina, would disappear. Sherry testified that Dina was neglecting her antipsychotic medication, and it was due to her church's bizarre belief that medication was, quote, "from the devil." Another psychiatrist, Dr. William Reed, he testified that people in Dina's life, they missed obvious signs of her mental distress, and they really failed her. He said, quote, "Everything I've seen indicates to me that she did not know that what she was doing was wrong, and she did not know right from wrong." Robert, her stepfather, also testified, as he had done at her competency hearing. He believed that the surgeries Dina experienced as a child had to have had an impact on her. Even 59-year-old Connie, Dina's mother, had flown down from Canada, that's where she was living at that point, to testify at her daughter's trial. Although at this time, get this, Connie had severe Parkinson's. She was bound to a wheelchair, was wheeled in by her husband Mick, and was barely able to talk. In fact, she could only communicate through a thumbs up or a thumbs down and could only answer yes or no questions. It is said that when Connie developed Parkinson's, Dina took it especially hard. Because remember how close Dina and her mother were. She relied on her mother for, like, emotional support, and when her mother's health began to deteriorate, she relied more and more on John for that emotional support. Finally, after 4 days of deliberation, a mistrial was declared. The jury was deadlocked and had been deadlocked for 4 days. They had deliberated for a total of 42 hours. They had gone to the judge after the second day of deliberations, but the judge had told them, like, go back and try to get a verdict anyway. The jury then came back with, like, really weird questions, such as asking the court to define the term deliberation and to define the role of a juror. And then on February 26th, 2006, after a 9-hour session on the 4th day of deliberations, the judge had officially declared a mistrial. The jury just told the court, like, dude, it's pointless to make us argue, like, we're deadlocked. There was a 10-2 split in favor of a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. There was one juror who had made up his mind about Dina the very first day and couldn't be persuaded otherwise. And there was another juror who just couldn't make up their mind one way or the other. Now, because the story, made the press rounds, there were a lot in the press and in the public who blamed John just as much as Dina. George Elwell, he was president of the Collin County chapter of the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and he accused the Schlossers of being brainwashed by their church and contended that John and the church, they should be the ones on trial for murder, not Dina. John Dornheim of Green Oaks Hospital, he said, quote, "She made cries for help, but nobody interpreted them correctly. The whole mental health system and childcare system of the state of Texas was heavily scrutinized. People just couldn't understand why, after, like, several of these public public incidents, after all these desperate cries for help, that no one helped Dina. And they didn't help her children either. A Dallas psychologist, her name was Anne Dunwald, and she said, quote, "Somebody has to start saying something about evangelical religion's role in these tragedies we've had in Texas." Dina's case was largely compared to that of Andrea Yates, hence kind of the discussion of the fundamental religion. After the mistrial, Dina was sent back to the North Texas State Hospital, and on April 7th, 2006, Dina was retried on capital murder charges. A week prior, both the prosecution and the defense, they decided that Judge Chris Oldner, who had presided over the original trial, he would come to a verdict. They wouldn't call a jury. It would be a judge who would decide. It was also revealed at this time that Dina had a brain tumor. And I guess the theory is that this brain tumor could have caused her hallucinations. Apparently, there was a witness in her first trial, and they were supposed to testify about like a brain lesion on her scans. But I guess a miscommunication between doctors or something, it caused a delay in further testing, and so they were unable to grab this witness to testify. And this further testing happened 3 weeks after the mistrial, and it was then revealed that it was a brain tumor. But neither that nor any of the other evidence was discussed at the retrial. In the end, Judge Oldner, he ruled, based on the evidence brought in the first trial, that Dina was not guilty by reason of insanity. She was sent back to North Texas State Hospital, and she was to be here for 30 days. After the 30 days, the hospital issued a report, and it would detail her status, and the judge would decide if she needed to be recommitted or if she could be released. And after the 30 days, this happened, and the judge recommitted her. 6 months later, this same cycle repeated itself. And after this, Dina had to have an annual hearing where every year a judge would decide if she would be recommitted to the hospital or released. In October of 2006, Dina made headlines once again when it was revealed that she made a new friend at the hospital. It was none other than Andrea Yates. The two women shared a room with 6 twin beds, and it was reported that after lights out, the two would talk and confide to one another. Dina told the Dallas Morning News in an interview her first public comments since everything happened. And she said, quote, "She is almost my identical personality. I think we'll be friends forever. I've only known her a short period of time, but I believe the feeling is mutual. She probably thinks the same thing. We talk about our past. We talk about our memories, our fun memories, the things that our kids did." Doctors at the hospital were not very happy that Dina was giving these like phone interviews to the Dallas Morning News. They tried to get Andrea to comment as well, but she declined. She was not really interested. And the hospital did not allow Dina to give an in-person interview. They were upset enough that she was doing phone interviews. So at the state hospital that Dina and Andrea were at, it is said that patients are pretty much blocked from the outside world. There's no television, there's no newspapers, there's no knowledge of what's going on in the outside world. It is said because the primary focus is for them to focus on themselves and getting better, focusing on maintaining their sanity and all that. Dina's day at the hospital consisted of spending 2 to 3 hours outdoors, where she mostly just like walked a track that was outside. She took a computer class, went to church twice a week, and of course, met with her doctors. That was what her life consisted of in the hospital. She worked in the prison hospital, the token store, and a screen printing shop that they had. Though the hospital did offer group therapy, Dina declined. She was more than happy just to talk to her friend Andrea. Although Mick, Dina's stepfather, remember, he's a psychologist, he's a mental health professional as well. He did worry about the friendship that Dina had, but mainly because he said that Dina had a habit of over-identifying with people. One day, he said that Dina had called him and her mother up, and that she was crying because her and Andrea had like a very emotional, deep talk, and it was regarding their children. And Mick said that Dina told him that they were both feeling, quote, guilty, remorseful, and sad. In this interview that Dina gave, she did talk about her surviving 2 daughters. She had written them each a letter every week that she had been locked up, and she didn't mail them though. She kept these unmailed letters in her room, waiting for the day that her daughters might want to read them. And the letters that Dina called, quote, gentle letters, I guess she does not discuss Margaret, doesn't discuss the incident, doesn't discuss her illness. Instead, she just talks about how much she loves her children and misses them. I guess both of Dina's parents had visited the girls in August before they were going to visit Dina. This was also before Dina gave this interview. And I guess when Mick asked if either of the girls had anything that they, wanted them to relay to their mother, it is said that they both quickly and firmly said no. So as Dina was locked up, John filed for divorce. I think he had actually filed for divorce during her trial, actually. And I said this earlier, he moved to Weatherford, and he cut off all contact with Dina. He talked to her once after she was arrested, and completely cut her off after that. By the time Dina was locked up with Andrea, I guess she had finally come to accept that her marriage with John was in fact over. There was like a part of her that hoped her and John could reconcile, even after everything. But I guess by the time she made news for being friends with Andrea, she had really kind of like come to realization like, yeah, it's over. John has refused all interviews and has refused to release any type of public statements. I mean, we said earlier when we introduced to this guy, he's a very private guy, so I'm not really surprised. John and Dina's divorce was finalized in 2007, and Dina was forever barred from having any contact with either of her two daughters. Oh, you can tell how hot it's getting because my thing is pushing up on my forehead, so I'm just going to take it down because it is hot. So let's get a little bit more into this interview that Dina gave with the Dallas Morning News. So Dina did answer some questions that people had regarding those who blamed John and others in her life who didn't get her help and didn't realize that she needed help. She said, quote, "I've never held anyone accountable for what I did except for me. They tell me that I had all these people that let me down. I completely don't feel that way." She continued, quote, "I completely changed." And this was after diving into her religion. That was what this was in reference to. "And I went into a submissive role, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. I didn't see anything abusive about it. I don't think he abused me. He did move into a role with me at the time where we decided he was going to make the decisions as far as our money, where we lived, etc. But I didn't make any decisions about our money or anything that was of importance. He did all the thinking in the family. We just kind of coexisted that way." She spoke of her delusions as well, explaining that neither she nor John knew how sick she was. She spoke how these delusions were so real to her, quote, "I believed them." She spoke of one delusion where she thought she was supposed to feed the world. Quote, "I thought that people were going to come to my house, and I was just going to offer them all our food, and I would actually wait for that to happen." She spoke about the importance of mental health and how serious it was, comparing it to cancer. Quote, "I feel very strongly that there be avenues and education out there for women who are having babies or who have had babies or are going to have babies in the future." In the interview, Dina said that she had no specific memories of that terrible day that she calls, quote, "the tragedy," but she does know that she did kill her baby, Margaret. Dina had yet another trial, and this time she was sent to Rusk State Hospital in Rusk, Texas. In June of 2008, Dina asked a judge to release her. She wrote, quote, "I am confident that in light of the corrected documentation, my current mental health needs can be adequately met by community services, and that I am no longer in need of institutionalized care." But her request wouldn't be considered until her annual recommitment hearing. And that happened on November 6th of that year. At that hearing, a judge declared that there was, quote, "convincing evidence that the needs of 39-year-old Dina and the, quote, "safety of the community could be met with outpatient services." Dina was required to see a psychiatrist once a week, take physician-approved birth control, take her medications, and was barred from having any type of contact with her other two children. In fact, she couldn't have contact with any child. If she violated any of these provisions, she would be sent back to the inpatient state hospital. Since Dina had been found not guilty by reason of insanity, the judge had to base all of his decisions on mental health professionals and their recommendations and what they said. The prosecutor in both of Dina's trials disagreed with Dina's release. Now, once released, it is said that Dina got a job and seemed to be doing okay. She was taking her medication and going to her therapy and counseling, and things seemed okay. But in March of 2010, firefighters found Dina wandering down her street at 2 a.m. Neighbors had reported seeing her stumbling and just kind of walking around dazed, confused. She was screaming, singing religious songs. She was then sent to Terrell State Hospital, and this was on April 23rd, 2010. A judge ordered her to formally stay there until she was deemed fit to be released. Now, at some point, I don't know when, but Dina was released from that hospital. And in June of 2012, Dina, who was going by her maiden name, she was hired at a Walmart in Terrell. However, get this, in August, a Dallas television station, WFAA, they found out who she was and that she was working at this Walmart. And they decided to inform Walmart about who Dina was, and they wanted to know, like, oh, did you know that you're hiring this, like, child murderer or whatever? Yeah, and it kind of went viral in the local area, and yeah, Walmart promptly fired her. And the latest I could find about Dina was from an article dated December 16th, 2020. So it is said that she had been recommitted to a state hospital. Judge Andrea Thompson, she proclaimed that Dina had, quote, religious delusions when she was not on her antipsychotic medication, that it was better for all involved, including Dina herself, if she was just locked away and supervised at all times. It was revealed at a commitment hearing that Dina had been diagnosed with a previous unknown personality disorder. And I guess they were saying this disorder caused Dina to not really, like, appreciate the gravity of, like, situations. And it was also revealed at that hearing that even when she was on medication, Dina still suffered religious delusions and still buried herself in religious stuff. I do believe she remains locked up in a state hospital to this day, where hopefully she's being monitored by professionals, getting the care and treatment she needs, and taking the medication she needs. And, whew boy, that was a long one. That was a lot. That was the story of Dena Schlosser, which, man, this one just makes me sad. This one just makes my heart so heavy. Like, it's just sad all the way around. Poor baby Margaret. Poor Dina. Like, I don't know. I guess these stories just really scare me because no one asks for mental health issues, right? Like, and that's the thing, right? Your brain can turn on you like that. Like, that third pregnancy is really what triggered her psychosis, or like whatever it is that happened. That third pregnancy is what triggered it. And man, like, I just feel so sorry for Dina. I feel so sorry for her children, for little baby Margaret. What do you guys think? I'm curious. What do you guys think about John? Do you think he should bear some responsibility? I can't help but think that he should, honestly. Like, he should. Like, why isn't he charged, I don't know, some sort of, like, neglect or something? Like, and what do you guys think about Doyle Davidson in the church? Should they bear some responsibility? Should Doyle? I would love to know what you guys think, because, man, like, I'm sorry. I'm not religious. I don't believe in that stuff. I'm atheist. So, like, yeah, not only do, I just not into the religious thing, but, like, the stuff Doyle was saying, I was like, are you for real? Like, what? Like, yeah. And of course, he had an affair, right? Big shock. Like, the guy is a walking stereotype. He's a walking trope. I don't know. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Please tell me, like, do you think Dina doesn't deserve sympathy? I feel sorry for her. Like, my heart just breaks for her. Like, it's just sad. I think it's just sad all the way around. I feel so sorry for her two children. Like, oh, her poor daughters. I don't know. It's just sad. It's sad. Please tell me your thoughts. I would love to know. So yeah, I think that'll do it for this week for Crime Dive. Next week, I have another case that was suggested. That's right. I told you I'm getting into these cases, guys, but man, y'all have given me some really meaty ones, all right? Some real meaty ones that I really got to tear into, so it takes me some time, all right? But I promise, I have a list, guys. I have a list, and I'm getting to it. So yeah, next week will be another requested case, and until we meet again next week, I hope you just stay safe out there. Remember, don't be a dick, don't be a twat, just be cool, just be zen, all right? Be cool when you go out there in the world, and yeah, just treat your fellow human beings like human beings, all right? Alrighty, guys, I hope you also have luck in cooling off. I'm dying. I cannot wait to go stand in front of a fan and blast my AC, because it is hot. It is hot. That's why I wore this, like, black shirt so you guys couldn't see my sweat stains. Okay, well, yeah, keep cool out there, or keep warm if you're in an area that's suffering cold right now. Let me know. What's the weather like where you're at right now? Alrighty, guys, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.